Single dad waiter took leftover food home until a millionaire followed him, and so all changed. He had done it 100 times, slipped out through the back, head down, coat pressed close against his chest. Nobody ever looked twice at the waiter who never caused trouble. But tonight someone was watching. And what Ashley Monroe was about to discover would shake the very foundation of everything she thought she had built. No one imagined what would come next. The dinner rush at Monroe's was exactly what it always was on a Thursday night in October. A beautiful controlled chaos of clinking glasses, perfume trails, and the low murmur of conversations that cost more per hour than Brian Calloway made in a week. The restaurant gleamed under warm, amber lighting, its mahogany tables polished to mirrors, its servers moving with the rehearsed grace of people who had learned that invisibility was a form of excellence. Brian was the best at being invisible. He had been a waiter at Monroe's for 3 years. 3 years of yes sir and right away ma'am, and of course I'll have that corrected immediately. 3 years of watching people spend $400 on a bottle of wine without blinking, while he calculated whether he could afford Alyssa's new winter boots before the first frost hit their side of Cleveland. He never complained. He never asked for more shifts than he was given. He simply arrived early, worked clean, and left quietly. That was the deal he had made with himself the night his wife, Dana, had packed a single bag and walked out the front door of their rented house on Elmwood Avenue, leaving behind a note on the kitchen counter and a sleeping 2-year-old in a crib upstairs. The note had 11 words. He had memorized them without meaning to. I love her, but I can't do this anymore. That was 4 years ago. Alyssa had been 2. She was 6 now, with her mother's dark curly hair and her father's stubborn chin, and she believed, with the whole uncomplicated heart of a child, that her father was the strongest man in the world. Brian intended to keep it that way for as long as humanly possible. It was the bread that had started it all, nearly 8 months ago. On a slow Wednesday in February, Brian had been the last server out, and he had stood at the discard station watching the kitchen team bag up half a tray of untouched dinner rolls. Soft, golden, still warm from the oven, and deposit them into the black waste bin beside the loading dock. He had thought of Alyssa. She had been eating cereal for dinner 3 nights running because the grocery run had gotten away from him that week, shifted out by an unexpected charge on the water bill. The rolls had been going to waste. No one was there but him and a dishwasher who was listening to music through one earbud and paying attention to nothing else. He had taken 3 rolls, wrapped them in a napkin, slid them into his jacket pocket. He had felt, doing it, like the kind of man he had promised himself he would never become. And then he had gone home and watched his daughter eat warm bread at 10:30 at night with the pure animal happiness of a hungry child. And the shame had shifted into something more complicated, something he didn't have a clean name for. Not pride, not justification, just a quiet settling of accounts between who he thought he should be and what his daughter actually needed. After that, it became a system. Methodical, careful, never excessive. He paid attention to what the kitchen discarded and took only what would genuinely go to waste. He bought the insulated bag, which made it feel less like concealment and more like logistics. He told himself, because it was true, and because he needed it to be enough, that he was not a thief. He was a father making a calculation. The city of Cleveland had never given him a category for that, so he had made one up and lived inside it as cleanly as he could. He was good at being invisible. He had been practicing since he was 12 years old, when his mother had worked 2 jobs, and the best thing he could do for her was to not add to the noise. Invisibility was a skill like any other. You got better at it with practice. You learned which behaviors drew attention and which didn't. 3 years at Monroe's, and he had it dialed in perfectly. Or so he had believed. Table 7 needs their check, said Marcus, the floor manager, sliding past him near the service station with the efficiency of a man who communicated entirely in imperatives. Brian nodded, tucked the leather bill holder under his arm, and moved toward table 7 with a smile that had cost him years to perfect. Warm without being intrusive, present without being overbearing. The couple at table 7 were in their 60s, celebrating something. The woman wore a pearl necklace and laughed at everything her husband said. Brian thought about his own parents briefly, the way a person touches a bruise just to confirm it still hurts. and then he set the check down with a quiet flourish and returned to the service station. It was near the end of his shift, around 10:15, when he did what he always did. 1 container of minestrone, half a loaf of rosemary focaccia, a portion of the herb-roasted chicken. He packed it into the black insulated bag and zipped it and closed his locker and pulled on his jacket. He walked out through the employee exit on the east side of the building at the end of his shift. Marcus had seen the bag dozens of times. So had the other servers. No one had ever asked about it. Brian was, after all, invisible. What he did not know, on this particular Thursday night in October, was that Ashley Monroe had arrived. She almost never came in on Thursdays. As the owner, she kept irregular hours, appearing sometimes during a lunch service to review numbers with the general manager, sometimes late on a Saturday to walk the dining room and make sure everything reflected her standards. She was 28 years old and had inherited the restaurant from her uncle at 24, when she had been finishing her MBA and had no idea what to do with a mid-tier Cleveland steakhouse that smelled like grease and broken ambition. She had spent 2 years gutting it and rebuilding it, new kitchen, new concept, new name, and Monroe's had become quietly but unmistakably one of the finest restaurants in the city. People thought she had it all. Ashley was aware of this in the way that a person is aware of a coat that doesn't quite fit. She wore the assumption without being able to fully inhabit it. She had the restaurant. She had the penthouse apartment on Prospect Avenue. She had the car and the accounts and the membership at the club downtown where she sometimes sat alone at the bar and let people assume she was waiting for someone. What she did not have was anyone who actually knew her. Not fully. Her last relationship had ended 14 months ago, quietly and without drama, the way things end when 2 people realize they have been performing intimacy rather than experiencing it. She had come in tonight to review the October inventory reports with the night manager. It was a task she could have done remotely, but the apartment had felt very still that evening. And sometimes a person needs the noise of a working restaurant just to feel like they are part of the living world. She was at the small manager's desk near the back of the kitchen, half reading a spreadsheet and half listening to the rhythm of the closing kitchen crew, when she saw him. Brian Calloway was standing at his locker. She recognized him vaguely. A face from the floor, reliable attendance record, no disciplinary notes in his file. He had his back partially turned and didn't know she was there. She watched him open the insulated black bag, glance briefly to his left, and then begin, with quiet, deliberate movements, to pack containers from the discard station into it. One by one, the minestrone, the focaccia, a capped container she couldn't identify from where she sat. Ashley felt something move through her that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite curiosity. It was sharper than both. She watched him zip the bag, close his locker, pull on his jacket. He moved like a man accustomed to being unnoticed. And for reasons she could not have articulated in that moment, could not have explained to anyone, including herself, she decided to follow him. She grabbed her coat from the manager's office without a word to anyone. She went out through the same employee exit 30 seconds behind him, into the cold October night. The city was dark and sharp and full of sounds she usually filtered out from inside the restaurant, and she pulled her coat close and kept her distance on the sidewalk and told herself, 2 more blocks, 2, and then I stop. She said that at every corner. She did not stop once. The night was sharp and clear, the kind of Cleveland October that doesn't apologize for itself. Ashley kept her distance on the sidewalk, her heels replaced by the flat ankle boots she kept in her office for late nights. Brian walked at a steady pace, unhurried, the black bag hanging from his right hand. He turned left on Chester Avenue, then right on East 71st Street, moving deeper into a neighborhood Ashley did not know well. The kind of block where the houses were small and close together, where porch lights worked harder than street lamps, where someone had planted marigolds in a window box and forgotten to pull them in before the cold got serious. She felt absurd. She was a 28-year-old restaurant owner following one of her employees through a residential neighborhood at 10:45 at night, with no clear plan and an increasingly uncomfortable awareness that she had perhaps made a very poor decision. But she didn't turn back. Something in the way he walked kept her moving, not guiltily, not furtively, but with a kind of quiet purpose that felt, irrationally, like something worth understanding. He stopped in front of a narrow two-story house on the left side of the block. The porch light was on. There was a small paper jack-o'-lantern taped to the inside of the front window, the kind a child makes in school, with construction paper and safety scissors. Brian reached the front door, paused, and seemed to do something with his expression before he put the key in the lock. Ashley was close enough, partially obscured by a large oak on the sidewalk, to see it clearly. He smoothed his face. Whatever weight he had been carrying in his body during the walk, and there had been weight, she could see that now, looking back. He deliberately set it down before walking through that door, like a man who had decided that the inside of that house was a protected space, and that whatever lived outside of it did not get to come in. He went inside. The light in the front room came on. Ashley stood on the sidewalk for a long moment. She should leave. She knew she should leave. Instead, she moved a few steps closer, keeping to the shadow of the oak tree, and looked through the front window. What she saw was not what she had been preparing herself to see. Not a fence, not a pawn shop, not evidence of whatever abstract wrongdoing she had constructed in her mind during the walk here. What she saw was a living room that was small, but meticulously clean. A couch with a blanket folded neatly over the armrest. A rug with a pattern of stars. A small bookshelf built from cinder blocks and painted boards, packed tight with picture books and early chapter books organized carefully by height. And in the center of that room, having clearly heard the key in the lock, a little girl in yellow pajamas with dark curly hair was scrambling off the couch with the urgency of a person who has been waiting for the most important thing in the world. Ashley could not hear through the glass, but she saw it all. Brian opened the insulated bag at the kitchen table, which was visible through the doorframe. The little girl, she looked to be around 6, climbed onto a kitchen chair and watched with the focused attention of someone expecting something wonderful. Brian set out the containers one by one, opening them with a kind of modest ceremony, turning the lids so she could see inside. The girl's face lit up at the bread. She said something. Brian laughed, a real laugh, not the polished professional version Ashley had presumably observed at table 7, and tore off a piece of the focaccia and handed it to her. The girl held it with both hands and ate it with a concentration that was somehow the most unaffected thing Ashley had seen in years. They ate together at the kitchen table. Brian had a small portion. He gave the girl most of it. Ashley stood outside in the October cold for 11 minutes. She knew it was 11 minutes because she checked her phone when she arrived at the tree and checked it again when she finally made herself walk away. She walked back the way she had come, past the marigolds and the porch lights and the small, careful lives arranged on either side of the street, and she did not call a car until she was back on Chester Avenue. And when the car came, she sat in the back seat and looked out the window at the dark city and said nothing at all. She was trying to locate a feeling. It was somewhere underneath the thing she would have called, in a professional context, an HR matter. It was underneath the reflexive audit of restaurant policy and inventory management. It was somewhere closer to the bone, in a place she hadn't visited in a long time. A quiet, uncomfortable region of herself where she stored things she didn't know how to process. She had followed him expecting to find something small and shameful. What she had found instead was a man who walked through the cold every night with a bag of leftovers to feed his daughter, who set his grief down at the door so she wouldn't feel it, who laughed a real laugh over a piece of restaurant bread like it was the best meal of his life. She thought about the inventory report still open on the manager's desk. She thought about the $400 bottles of wine and the pearl necklaces and the couples celebrating things she had stopped being curious about. She thought about her own refrigerator, which contained at that moment sparkling water, 3 containers of takeout from different restaurants, and a block of aged cheese she had purchased with great intention 2 weeks ago and never opened. The car turned onto Prospect Avenue. Ashley Monroe stared at her own building and felt, for the first time in longer than she could easily measure, the specific and uncomfortable sensation of being genuinely ashamed of herself, not of what she had built, not of what she had worked for, but of what she had somehow, in all that building and working, managed not to see. She went upstairs. She poured a glass of water. She sat at her kitchen island and opened her laptop and pulled up Brian Calloway's employee file, not to build a case against him, but to understand. 3 years of employment. Not a single complaint. Performance reviews that use the same word twice, steady. Under emergency contact, a single name. His mother, Patricia Calloway in Akron. Under dependent information, 1 entry. Alyssa Calloway, age 6. No second parent listed. Ashley closed the laptop and sat in her quiet, expensive apartment for a long time. She had made a decision before she went to bed. She didn't know yet what it would cost her, or him, or whether it was even a decision that belonged to her to make. But it had settled into place with the particular solidity of things that are true, and she had learned, in 28 years of building things from nothing, that it was better to trust those moments than to explain them away into nothing. She was going to do something. She just hadn't figured out what yet. But when she finally turned out the light and lay in the dark of her bedroom, the image she could not stop returning to was not the restaurant, not the spreadsheet, not Dana Peralta's name in the employee file. It was a little girl in yellow pajamas eating bread with both hands, and a father watching her with an expression that had no performance in it at all. The kind of expression you only wear when you believe no one is watching. For 3 days, Ashley watched. She came into Monroe's on Friday under the pretext of a meeting with the beverage director, and she watched Brian work the lunch service from the corner table near the host stand, where she sometimes sat with her laptop. He was as good as his review said. Fluid, precise, incapable of being rattled. A four-top near the window had a complicated dietary modification situation involving one guest with a nut allergy, one who had requested vegan modifications to a non-vegan dish, and a third who wanted to substitute the house salad for the charcuterie board without paying the price difference. Brian handled all 3 without breaking stride, without a trace of the exasperation that most experienced servers learned to hide and failed. She watched him the way you watch something when you are trying to understand what it is you are actually seeing. On Saturday she came in again, this time for the dinner service. She found a reason to be near the service station during the staff meal, and she watched who Brian ate with. He sat with Marcus at the end of the bar for about 8 minutes, ate quickly, and spent the rest of the break on his phone. She watched him look at the screen with an expression she recognized, the expression of a person reading something difficult and choosing, very carefully, how to feel about it before putting it away. He put the phone in his pocket before anyone spoke to him again. On Sunday morning, she made 2 calls. The first was to Karen Ellison, a woman she had gone to business school with, who now ran a nonprofit focused on single-parent household support in the greater Cleveland area. She asked in general terms about resources for single fathers in the city, what was available, what the gaps were, what the most common pressures looked like. Karen talked for 40 minutes. Ashley took notes and asked follow-up questions and found herself understanding something about a world that had existed, in its full weight, directly beneath her own for years without her fully registering it. The second call was harder to make, and she put it off until the afternoon, sitting cross-legged on her couch with the Sunday light coming flat and pale through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Then she picked up her phone and called her own father. The conversation lasted 9 minutes. Her father, Douglas Monroe, lived in a retirement community in Scottsdale and had opinions about everything and genuine interest in very little. He asked how the restaurant was doing. She said fine. He said he had read an article about restaurant margins. She said yes, she was aware of restaurant margins. He asked if she was seeing anyone. She said no. He said she worked too hard. She said she learned that from him. It was, by their standards, an intimate exchange. When she hung up, she sat with the phone in her hands and thought about Alyssa Calloway in yellow pajamas eating focaccia with both hands at a small kitchen table on East 71st Street. And she felt the silence of her apartment in a way she did not usually allow herself to feel it. She went into Monroe's on Monday specifically to speak with Marcus. Brian Calloway, she said without preamble, sitting across from Marcus in the small office behind the service bar. What's his situation? Marcus, who had the patience of a man who had managed restaurant floors for 20 years and therefore assumed nothing surprised him, arranged his face carefully. Good worker, he said. Best table rotation on the floor. Guests love him. I know that, Ashley said. I mean personally. What do you know? Marcus looked at her for a moment. He was 51, careful, deeply loyal to the restaurant in the way that people are loyal to things they helped shape. He said slowly, single dad. His little girl has some after-school thing on Tuesdays and Thursdays that he's very protective of getting home for. He's never asked for a shift change except once. Last February when she had some kind of medical appointment. A pause. He's never late. Honestly, Ms. Monroe, in 20 years managing floors, I've had maybe 3 servers I'd put in the same category. Steady isn't a small thing in this business. Has he ever taken food from the restaurant? Ashley asked directly. Marcus was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Not that I'm aware of, he said, which was not the same as no, and they both understood that clearly. Ashley looked at the wall above Marcus's head. On it was a framed photograph from the night Monroe's had received its first major press review. A full staff photo. Everyone in their uniforms, the kitchen team in whites, her in the center with an expression she now recognized with some distance as exhausted relief dressed up as triumph. I want to increase his hourly rate, she said. Not a raise in the traditional sense. I want to restructure the compensation structure for senior floor staff. He qualifies by tenure and performance. I also want to increase the staff meal allocation, quantity and quality. I want the kitchen to prep properly for it, not just whatever's left over, starting this week. Marcus nodded slowly, with the expression of a man who suspected he was being told only part of a larger thing. And Marcus, she said, standing. The discard policy. I want to revisit it. I've been reading about food waste initiatives in the industry. I want to formalize a program where surplus food goes somewhere useful instead of the bin. Research what other comparable restaurants are doing and put together a proposal for me. She left before he could ask anything she wasn't prepared to answer. What she didn't tell Marcus, what she hadn't told anyone, and wasn't sure she fully understood herself, was that something had shifted in her since Thursday night. It wasn't guilt exactly, though guilt was part of it. It was more like the sudden awareness of a room in your own house that you have been walking past for years without opening the door, and the particular vertigo of standing in it and realizing it was full of something real. She had built Monroe's from a broken-down steakhouse on a block nobody was paying attention to. She had created 47 jobs. She had a wine list that a national publication had described as authoritative, and a pastry program that had made one food writer weep. Genuinely weep, in print. She had done all of that, and it was real, and she was proud of it. But she had also, somewhere in the construction of all that achievement, lost the ability to look at the people directly in front of her and see what they were actually carrying home at night. She had looked at Brian Calloway for 3 years and seen a function, a floor roll, a performance rating, a line in a payroll document. She had needed a cold October night and 11 minutes on a sidewalk to see a man. That was Thursday's revelation. Friday's arrived before her coffee at 6:47 in the morning, in the form of an email. The sender was listed as Dana Peralta. The subject line read, "Regarding Brian Calloway. I think you should know." Ashley stared at the unopened email for a long time. The name meant nothing to her. There was no explanation of how Dana Peralta had gotten her private email address, or why she was contacting the owner of a Cleveland restaurant about a member of her waitstaff before 7 in the morning. When she finally opened it, she read 3 lines. Dana Peralta was Alyssa's mother. She had recently returned to Cleveland after 4 years away. She was pursuing legal action to reestablish contact with her daughter, whom she claimed Brian had systematically kept from her since the child was 2 years old. She said she had documentation. She said she believed Ashley, as Brian's employer, might want to be aware of the full picture of the man she was so interested in. Ashley closed the laptop. She stood at her kitchen window and looked at the city below, gray and wide in the early morning, and she thought about yellow pajamas and construction paper jack-o'-lanterns, and the way Brian had set his weight down at the door before walking inside. And she felt, for the first time since Thursday night, something cold and uncertain move through the center of the story she had been quietly, carefully building in her mind. Because if Dana Peralta was telling the truth, then the man she had watched through that window was not entirely the man she thought she had seen. And if she was not telling the truth, then something else entirely was happening. Something that had found Ashley's name and used it deliberately, and that was a different kind of problem, with a different kind of danger. She needed to talk to Brian Calloway, directly, before she did anything else at all. Brian had not expected to be called into a meeting with Ashley Monroe. In 3 years at Monroe's, he had spoken to the owner exactly 4 times, twice during the all-staff meetings she held at the start of each year, once when she had walked the dining room floor during a Saturday service and paused at his station to say something brief and approving about the way he had handled a difficult table, and once in the parking lot when they had both arrived at the same early hour and exchanged nothing more than a nod. She existed in a different register of the restaurant than he did. That was simply the architecture of the place, and he had never had reason to question it. So when Marcus told him, with careful neutrality, that Ms. Monroe would like to speak with him at the end of Thursday's shift, Brian had spent the entirety of the dinner service doing what he always did when something frightening was approaching. He worked. He worked with total precision and total focus because the only thing that kept the fear from becoming noise was the act of being exceptionally good at the immediate task in front of him. He already knew what it was about. He had known since the moment he'd zipped the black bag and felt the shift in the air that night a week ago. He had simply been waiting for the form it would take. He knocked on the open door of the meeting room at 10:32. Ashley Monroe was already there, seated, a notepad on the table in front of her that she turned face down when he entered. He noticed that. He noticed most things. It was another form of the same skill. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "please sit down." He sat. He put his hands flat on the table, because he had learned a long time ago that stillness communicated more control than crossed arms ever could. "I want to be straightforward with you," she said. "I was at the restaurant last Thursday evening. I saw you at the discard station. I followed you home." He didn't move. The only thing that changed was something behind his eyes. A very small, very controlled adjustment. The kind you make when something you have been bracing for finally arrives and you are deciding in real time how to receive it. "Okay," he said. "I'm not here to fire you," she said. "I want to be clear about that first." A pause. "Okay," he said again. "I saw you with your daughter," Ashley said. "I watched through the window. I know that is an intrusion, and I want to apologize for it." She said it plainly, without softness designed to manage his reaction. He understood in that moment that she meant it. "I've been trying to understand what I saw and what it means, and I've been doing that badly, because I've been doing it without talking to you. So I'm talking to you now." Brian looked at her for a long moment. The composed face held. And then, very slightly, "It didn't." "She's 6, he said. "Her name is Alyssa. Her mother left when she was 2 years old. I've been doing this since before I worked here. The food that goes in the trash. I've never taken anything that was going to be served or sold. Only discard. Only what was already gone." "I know," Ashley said. "I know it's not technically." "I know," she said again, more quietly. The silence between them was a different kind of silence than before, less armored on both sides. "Someone emailed me," Ashley said. She watched him closely. "A woman named Dana Peralta." The composed face came back instantly, completely, and it was a harder quality of composed, the kind that costs something to maintain. "What did she say?" he said, and it was not quite a question and not quite a statement. "She said she was Alyssa's mother," Ashley said. "She said she had returned to Cleveland and was seeking to re-establish contact with her daughter through legal proceedings. She said you had been preventing that contact for 4 years. She said she had documentation." Brian was quiet for a long time, long enough that Ashley did not fill the silence, which he noted with a certain careful respect, because most people in positions of power filled silences instinctively, the way they filled empty space on a wall. "Alyssa was 22 months old," he said finally. "There was an incident. I have photographs. I have a pediatrician's report. I have a custody order signed by a judge in Cuyahoga County that gives me primary custody. and establishes supervised visitation as the terms under which contact could be re-established. Dana did not pursue that supervised visitation. She moved to Seattle 4 years ago, and I did not hear from her until 31 days ago, when certified mail arrived informing me that her attorney was filing to modify the custody arrangement. Ashley said nothing. She was listening the way people listen when they are taking something seriously. She has been sober for 14 months, Brian continued, his voice steady and without bitterness, which cost him something she probably couldn't see. She has a stable job, a new partner. Her attorney is very good, and the court will weigh her changed circumstances against what happened 4 years ago. And my lawyer, who I cannot fully afford, tells me that is how the system works, that the past is weighted but not determinative. He said the last word with the precision of someone who has heard it enough times to understand exactly what it means and exactly what it doesn't mean. Ashley looked at him. Then she said quietly, "What does Alyssa know about her mother?" "That she exists," Brian said. "That she wasn't able to stay when Alyssa was a baby. That she loves her." A pause. "However I feel about Dana, Alyssa is going to grow up and form her own relationship with that story. I'm not going to be the reason she can't." Something crossed Ashley's face at that. He couldn't name it precisely. It wasn't pity. It was something more complicated, something that looked, from where he was sitting, like recognition. "I'm going to increase your hourly rate," Ashley said. "Senior floor staff restructuring. You qualify by tenure and performance. I'm also expanding the staff meal program and formalizing the food discard policy so that what you've been doing informally has a legitimate framework around it." She said it matter-of-factly, without ceremony. He looked at her. "Why?" She seemed genuinely surprised by the question. "Because it's the right thing to do," she said. "And because I think I've been running this restaurant for 3 years without paying enough attention to the people in it." He did not know how to respond to that, so he thanked her and left. He walked home along the usual route, but the cold felt different than it had a week ago. Not heavier exactly, but more specific, more real. Alyssa was asleep when he got in, Mrs. Nguyen long gone, a note on the counter that said she had eaten all her dinner and asked 4 questions about penguins. He went upstairs and stood in the doorway of her room for a long time. His phone showed a new email from Sheila Tate, his attorney. The subject line was, "Update, hearing date confirmed." He didn't open it. He stood there in the dark hallway with his phone in his hand and listened to his daughter breathe and thought about the word determinative. And about the way Ashley Monroe had said because it's the right thing to do without looking away. And about the fact that Alyssa had, sometime in the last week, named the stuffed penguin's imaginary offspring Gerald Jr., which meant Gerald had been promoted to a role of greater dignity without being consulted. Which was, Brian thought, the most Alyssa thing that had ever happened. He would deal with the email in the morning. He would figure out the rest piece by piece, the way he had always figured out the rest. He went to bed. He did not know, lying in the dark, that Ashley Monroe was still awake across the city, and that she had made a phone call that evening, before his meeting, before any of what had been said between them, to a family law firm whose name she had looked up on Sunday afternoon. A firm considerably larger than Sheila Tate's office. A firm that had changed how things worked in Ohio family court more than once. He did not know what had been said in that call. He did not know that it had anything to do with him. Not yet. The custody hearing was set for the 2nd week of November, which gave Brian 18 days from the date Sheila Tate's email confirmed it. 18 days to prepare documentation, to prepare himself, and to figure out how to explain to a 6-year-old in language that would not break something in her, that the world was about to change in a way he could not fully control. He had not told Alyssa yet. He had planned to, carefully, gently, in the language he had been rehearsing in his head for weeks. The version where her mother was a person who had been unwell and was better now and wanted to know her. The version that was true and also survivable. But every time he sat down across from his daughter at the kitchen table and looked at her face, the serious, dark eyes, the chin that was entirely his, the way she held her fork like she was conducting something, The words stayed where they were, and he talked about penguins or asked about her day or just let the quiet between them be what it was, which was the best thing in his life. He told her on a Sunday, the second Sunday in October, 3 weeks before the hearing. He made pancakes first, because some things needed a good foundation. "Allybird," he said, when the plates were cleared, and she was drawing on the back of a paper bag with the purple crayon she carried everywhere. "I need to tell you something important." She looked up. She had a way of looking at him when he said that phrase that made him feel simultaneously like the most trusted person in the world and the least qualified. "Is it bad?" she asked. "It's just true," he said. "And true things aren't always bad." He told her about her mother. Not everything. She was 6, and 6 was not the age for everything, but enough. He told her that her mother had been going through something very hard when Alyssa was a baby, and that she had needed to go away to get better, and that she had gotten better, and that she wanted very much to meet Alyssa now. He told her that there were going to be some meetings with some adults, including a judge who would help everyone figure out what was best. He told her that no matter what, she was going to be okay. He told her that she was going to be okay so many times in those 20 minutes that he began to understand he was telling himself as much as her. Alyssa was quiet for a long time after he finished. She put down the purple crayon. She looked at her hands on the table. Then she said, "Does she know about Gerald?" Brian blinked. "No," he said. "Gerald is important," Alyssa said, very seriously. "She should know about Gerald." He kept his face steady. "I'll make sure she knows," he said. That night, after Alyssa was in bed, Brian sat at the kitchen table and opened the email from Sheila Tate. There was an update at the bottom he had not seen in his first read. Dana's attorney had filed a secondary motion, a request for the court to appoint a guardian ad litem, an independent advocate for Alyssa, to assess her best interests. It was standard and complex custody modifications. Sheila had written, "This is not unusual and does not indicate anything negative about your position. However, it will add time and complexity. I want to discuss strategy when you're available." He called Sheila the next morning. She was measured as always, but he was good at reading the space between words, and what he heard in the space between Sheila's measured words was that Dana's legal team was very well resourced and very well prepared, and that the 14 months of documented sobriety combined with stable employment and a supportive partner created a genuinely compelling changed circumstances argument. "What are my strongest points?" Brian asked. "Consistent, documented primary caregiving for 4 years," Sheila said. "No incidents on your record. Alyssa's stability, school performance, medical records, social development, all of it excellent. The testimony of people who have witnessed your parenting directly. And my weakest?" A pause. "You are not well-resourced financially," Sheila said carefully. "Dana's team will not make that argument explicitly because it would look bad, but it shapes what they can do versus what we can do. And," she paused again, "there's something else. I received a letter this morning from a different firm. A firm called Hartwell & Associates." Brian did not recognize the name. "They are one of the top family law practices in Ohio," Sheila said. "The letter indicates they are entering the case as co-counsel on your behalf, with your permission. It indicates the retainer has been fully funded by an unnamed third party." A pause. "Brian, do you know what this is about?" He sat very still at the kitchen table. The morning light came through the window and fell across the salt shaker and the purple crayon Alyssa had left on the edge of the table. He thought about Ashley Monroe sitting across from him in the meeting room with her notepad turned face down. He thought about her saying, "Because it's the right thing to do," without looking away. "I might," he said. He called the number on Monroe's general contact page and asked to speak with Ms. Monroe directly. The hostess put him through without question, which told him something about how she had instructed her staff to handle his calls. "You hired me lawyers," he said when she answered. A pause. "Hartwell & Associates are the best family law practice in Cleveland," Ashley said. "You needed better representation." "You didn't ask me," he said. "No," she said. "I didn't. I'm sorry for that. I should have asked you first." The apology landed differently than he expected. It was not defensive. It was not followed by justification. It was just an apology, offered plainly, the way she had apologized for following him. "Why?" he said. It was the same question he had asked in the meeting room. "Because you deserved a fair fight," she said, "and because watching someone not have one, when you have the ability to change it, is something I decided I didn't want to be able to do." He sat with that for a moment. "I don't want charity," he said. It came out quieter than he intended, which meant it was true. "I know," Ashley said. "This isn't charity. Charity is giving someone something they didn't earn. You've earned, at minimum, the right to be seen. You have been working in my restaurant for 3 years, and I looked through you every single day. The least I can do is look at you clearly now." He did not have a response to that either. He was beginning to suspect that Ashley Monroe made a habit of saying things that left no clean exit. "There's something else," Ashley said, and her voice shifted, still controlled but carrying something different underneath it. Something that sounded, if he was reading it correctly, like she was preparing herself to say something that mattered and wasn't sure how he would receive it. "I've been looking into Dana Peralta," she said carefully. "Not to build a case, just to understand. And I found something, Brian, something that I think changes the picture significantly. I need to show you in person. Can you come in tomorrow morning before the lunch service?" He looked at the purple crayon on the edge of the table. He looked at the morning light on the salt shaker. He thought about Alyssa telling him Gerald needed to be introduced to her mother, said with the full administrative seriousness of a 6-year-old who had decided something was important, and therefore it was. "Yes," he said, "I'll be there." He spent the rest of that day not thinking about what Ashley might have found, because not thinking about it was the only way to function, and functioning was the only thing that was always required of him. He picked Alyssa up from school. He listened to a detailed account of an injustice involving assigned seating and the proximity of a boy named Trenton, who apparently made a sound with his straw that Alyssa found professionally unacceptable. He made dinner. He read 2 chapters of The Secret Garden book. He tucked her in and sat on the edge of her bed until her breathing slowed and the room was quiet, and it was just him and the dark and the sound of the street outside and the specific weight of not knowing what tomorrow would bring, and having to hold it anyway. Because there was no one else. "Daddy?" Alyssa said when he thought she was asleep. "Yeah, Allie Bird. Is the judge going to like me?" He was quiet for one breath. "The judge is going to see exactly who you are," he said. "And that's more than enough." She was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. And then she slept. He sat in the dark for a little while longer and did not let himself think about what it would mean to lose or what it would mean to win, because neither of those words was adequate for what was actually at stake, which was the ordinary, extraordinary fact of a little girl eating bread with both hands at a kitchen table, believing with her whole uncomplicated heart that her world was safe. Ashley had been awake since 4 a.m. She had found it 3 days ago, buried in a sequence of public record searches she had run with a methodical patience that surprised even her. She had not been looking for it specifically. She had been building a picture, the way she built every significant decision, gathering information until the shape of the thing became clear enough to act on. But when it appeared, there was no mistaking what it was, and for 20 minutes she had sat at her kitchen island staring at the document on her screen with a feeling that she recognized. From the very early days of rebuilding Monroe's, as the feeling of discovering that the foundation ran deeper than you thought. Brian arrived at 9:15. He was in his regular clothes, dark jacket, plain shirt, and he looked like a man who had slept badly and was not going to mention it. Ashley had coffee ready. She put a cup in front of him without asking and sat down across the table. "I want to preface this by saying that I looked into public records," she said. "Nothing private, nothing obtained improperly. Everything I found is a matter of public record in the state of Washington." Brian wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. He nodded. "Dana Peralta filed for bankruptcy in Seattle 14 months ago," Ashley said. "That's not what I need to tell you. What I need to tell you is what the bankruptcy filing listed as the primary liability." She turned her laptop to face him. "Her legal fees, specifically fees from a custody proceeding. In the state of Washington." Brian looked at the screen. Ashley watched him read. She watched the moment it landed, not in his face, but in his hands, which tightened once around the coffee cup and then went still. "She has a child in Seattle," Ashley said quietly. "A son. He's 3 years old. His father filed for and received sole custody 11 months ago. The custody order in that case, which is also public record, cites a pattern of behavior consistent with the documented incidents in your own custody filing. The timeline of her sobriety begins 3 months after that custody order was issued." Brian set the coffee cup down very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands are not entirely reliable. "Her attorney in the Cleveland case may not know about the Washington proceedings," Ashley said. "Or they may know and have calculated that it's not immediately discoverable. But Hartwell and Associates will find it within the first week of their case review, and when they present it to the court alongside your existing documentation, it changes the calculus of the changed circumstances argument significantly." She paused. "I'm not telling you this to take anything away from what Dana has done in the last 14 months. 14 months of sobriety is real, and it matters, and the court will weigh it. But the full picture is different from the picture she presented." Brian was quiet for a long time. The morning light came through the window of the meeting room and fell across the table between them, and Ashley let the silence be what it needed to be. "She has a son," he said finally. "Yes." 3 years old? "Yes." He looked at his hands. Then he looked up at Ashley, and for the first time since she had followed him home on a Thursday night and begun the slow process of actually seeing him, his face did something she had not seen it do before. It didn't smooth over. It didn't compose itself. It just held everything that was in it. The exhaustion and the relief and the grief and the ferocious love and the weight of 4 years of doing this alone, and it held it without apology. "Is he okay?" Brian asked. "The boy?" Ashley looked at him. Of all the things she had expected him to say in this moment, that was not what she had anticipated. "He's with his father," she said. "The father has full custody. From what I can determine from public records, the child is stable." Brian nodded. He looked at the table, "She keeps trying," he said. Not to Ashley specifically, just aloud. "That's the thing, she keeps trying and she keeps—" He stopped. "Alyssa is going to need to know about him someday, when she's old enough. She has a brother." Ashley said nothing. She was watching him do something she had watched very few people do, hold something genuinely painful without looking for somewhere to put it down. "The hearing is in 2 weeks, she said after a moment. "I know. Hartwell will need to debrief you this week. Sarah Hartwell herself is taking the case. She asked me to tell you that." Brian looked up. "You know her?" "We were in the same MBA program," Ashley said. "She left law school the same year I inherited the restaurant. We've stayed in touch." A pause. "She is very good, Brian. She is genuinely very good." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, in a voice that had something underneath the steadiness for the first time, "Why are you doing all of this?" It was the 3rd time he had asked her a version of that question. The first 2 times she had given him answers that were true as far as they went. This time, sitting across from him in the morning light with the thing she had found 3 days ago still open on her screen, she decided to give him the rest of it. "When I was 7 years old," she said, "my mother left. Not the way Dana left, not in crisis, not in the middle of something she couldn't handle. She just decided that the life she had was not the life she wanted, and she left, and my father, who is not an easy man to love, raised me alone. He did it badly in some ways and well in others, and I grew up thinking that the absence of a mother was simply an architectural fact of my life. The way some rooms don't have windows." She paused. "I built something because I needed to build something. I made it successful because success felt like proof that the architecture hadn't broken me. And then I stood on a sidewalk on a Thursday night in October, and I watched a man carry food home to his daughter because it was the only way he had to tell her that the world was okay. And something in me understood something that I had been very carefully not understanding for a long time." Brian said nothing. "I'm not trying to insert myself into your life," Ashley said. "I'm not trying to fix something that isn't mine to fix. I just... She stopped, started again. I looked through you for 3 years. I owe you a fair witness, that's all this is. The room was quiet. Outside, the sounds of the restaurant beginning its morning prep filtered under the door. The low voices of the kitchen crew, the clink of equipment, the particular rhythmic noise of a place waking up. The hearing is November 14th, Brian said. I know. Alyssa thinks the judge needs to know about her stuffed penguin, he said. Something happened in Ashley's face. It moved, quickly, and she looked down at the table for a moment before looking back up. Is he a good penguin? She said. He's an excellent penguin, Brian said. Highly reputable. His son is also very promising. Ashley smiled. It was not the professional smile. It was the other kind. Then the judge should absolutely know, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the window and the morning light and the coffee cup in front of him. He said, My lawyer, Sheila Tate. She worked on this case for a year and charged me what she could afford to charge me. And I want her to stay on it. Alongside Hartwell, I don't want her cut out. I already told Sarah that, Ashley said. Sheila stays. She knows the case better than anyone. They'll work together. He nodded. He picked up the coffee cup. Thank you, he said. It was a simple thing, plainly said, with all 3 years of invisibility and all 4 years of doing it alone somewhere underneath it. And Ashley received it the way it was offered, without deflecting, without diminishing, without the professional smile. You're welcome, she said. The hearing took place on November 14th at 9 in the morning in a courtroom on Lakeside Avenue, under a gray Cleveland sky that couldn't decide whether it wanted to rain or simply threaten. Brian wore the suit he had bought when Alyssa was born, which still fit because he had not gained weight in 4 years, and also had not had occasion to buy another suit. Sheila Tate sat on his left. Sarah Hartwell sat on his right. Sarah Hartwell was 41, precise, and had the particular stillness of someone who had been in enough rooms like this one to know exactly what each moment required. The Washington records were entered into evidence in the first hour. Dana's attorney asked for a recess. The recess lasted 40 minutes. When the proceedings resumed, the attorney announced that his client was withdrawing the motion to modify the existing custody arrangement. The judge looked at Dana across the courtroom. Brian looked at the table in front of him. He did not let himself feel anything yet, because he had learned that feeling things before they were fully over was a luxury that cost too much. The judge said that the existing custody order would remain in place. She said that should circumstances change further and both parties agree, a new petition could be brought at a future date. She said that the court strongly encouraged a therapeutic mediation process, in the interests of the child, to allow for some form of appropriate contact going forward. She said the child's welfare was the determining consideration, and had always been the determining consideration. Brian said yes. He said it clearly and without hesitation, because Alyssa had a brother in Seattle she didn't know about, and a mother who kept trying even when she kept failing, and a world that was more complicated than yellow pajamas and construction paper jack-o'-lanterns, and he had promised himself, on a night 4 years ago when everything else was broken, that he would never be the reason she couldn't see it clearly. He walked out of the courthouse into the gray November morning and called Mrs. Nguyen, who was watching Alyssa for the day, and told her everything was okay. Mrs. Nguyen said she knew it would be, and that he was a good boy, and that Alyssa had already eaten lunch and drawn a picture of the courthouse that she had described, with great architectural confidence, as probably looking like that. He laughed. He stood on the sidewalk outside the courthouse and laughed in a way he had not laughed in a very long time. He called Ashley. She answered on the second ring. "It's okay," he said. "It stayed. The order stayed." A pause. "Brian," she said. And then, because she was Ashley Monroe and not given to excess, she said nothing else. And he understood that too. 6 weeks later, on a Saturday in late December, there was snow on the ground in Cleveland, the real kind, the kind that covered everything and made the city look like it had been given a second chance. And Alyssa Calloway stood on the front porch of the house on Elmwood Avenue in her Arctic Explorer costume, which had been resurrected from Halloween for this specific occasion, holding Gerald in both arms and regarding the snow with the expression of a field scientist confirming a long-held hypothesis. "It looks exactly like the pictures," she said. "It does," Brian said, standing beside her. "Gerald agrees," she said. She turned and looked up at her father with the dark eyes and the stubborn chin. And she said, with the total uncomplicated certainty of a child who's been told the truth and held carefully, and taught that the world, despite its many inconveniences, is essentially survivable. "This is a good day, Daddy." He put his hand on the top of her head. The snow came down quiet and steady over the small house and the window box and the street and the city and all the complicated ordinary lives arranged on either side of it. "Yeah, Allie Bird," he said. "This is a good day." Across the city in a penthouse apartment on Prospect Avenue, Ashley Monroe was sitting at her kitchen island with a cup of coffee and the Sunday light coming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her refrigerator contained actual groceries. Her notepad was open to a new page. At the top, in her precise angular handwriting, she had written a single question. Not a task, not a plan, just a question she was sitting with for the first time in a long time, turning it over the way you turn something over when you are ready, finally, to look at all its sides. The question was, what do you actually want? She looked at it for a while. Then she picked up her phone and sent a message to Brian Calloway that said, "How's the snow from your end?" His reply came back in under a minute. A photograph. Alyssa in a winter coat and penguin hat, arms spread wide, standing in the middle of the white front yard with her face tipped up toward the sky, catching snowflakes on her tongue. Ashley looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she smiled, the real kind, not the professional one, and thought, there it is. There's the answer. Outside, the snow kept falling over Cleveland, soft and even and without apology, covering everything that had been worn and hard and difficult with something clean. The way time does when people finally decide to let it.